Hey folks, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today I'm going to show you what to do if you don't have room microphones on your drum kit. We're going to be looking at getting some room sound on a drum kit today, but before we dive in, if you are ready to dial in a repeatable workflow for getting professional sounding drum mixes, then I want you to go through my 3-step framework for mixing drums workshop. This workshop will walk you through the 3-step process that I use on almost every mix for getting pro drum mixes right from your home studio. It is a 100% free to watch, on-demand video training, and you can get access to that by clicking the link below in the video description. Completely free for you to watch. Let's jump in here now and look at this drum kit here. So you can see for our drum kit we have a kick mic, a snare mic, 2 toms, a rack tom and a floor tom, and then overheads here. No room mic here, but we do have my Bricasti close emulation. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. For the drum kit here. Now let me hit play and show you what our drums are sounding like inside the track here, and then I will solo up the drums and you can hear the drums in isolation with and without the room emulation here that we're going to add. So it'll start with it, and then I'll mute it and you can hear just the drum tracks here, no emulation, no reverb on them at all. So let me play you the track here and we'll get into our drums as well.
Look through any window, yeah, any time of day. See the drivers on the road, running down the heavy load.
You can hear what a difference just this one track makes in our overall drum sound. It takes our drums from being small and dry sounding to big and full sounding. So let's take a look here at what this track exactly is and how we have it set up inside our mix here. All it is I'm using the open air plugin here inside of Studio One. Any kind of reverb or IR, impulse response loading plugin will work for you. The open air plugin inside of Studio One is the plugin that allows you to load in impulse responses for reverbs. So I'm using the open air plugin and I'm loading in, it is called Room 2 Studio B. It is one of the room emulations from the Bricasti Simplicity collection. I'm not sure if it's still free to download. You can Google around to find it maybe. It's just the Simplicity Bricasti reverb pack, and you'll get all the different IRs that come from the Bricasti unit there. And I'm just using the Room 2 Studio B, and it's the close mics here. And it's just the mono to stereo version, so you can load in one impulse response on one plugin, and it'll be stereo for you. The only thing I've changed on this particular impulse response is I've lowered the length to about 400 milliseconds here. I think it comes in at about 2 seconds, which is very, very long, and it makes the drums sound a little messy when you hit play and they're all sending into this, because then you have all these different lengths kind of going, and toms ring out much longer than I want them to. Shortened up to about 400 milliseconds here, it sounds really tight, but it also gives the drums the ambience they need to feel like they're live drums in a live room, right? Because live drums without a room mic can feel very stale, and they can start to feel programmed, especially if it's a really good drummer who's very consistent with their hits. If there's no kind of depth or room sound, it can start to feel very programmed sounding. Excuse me. So this can help on live drums if you don't have a room mic. It can also help on programmed drums if you don't have a room sound, pulling this up underneath to give your drums that live ambience and live feel there. Let me solo this here and show you what just the room emulation sounds like here. So Bricasti close mics from the Bricasti room here. That's all this is now. You can hear it's a very balanced sounding picture of the kit in a room, which is why I like this plugin and why I like the room emulation so much from the Bricasti. It's very balanced sounding, especially after I get the EQ in, which we'll talk about in a moment here. All we're doing to get this set up is we're sending from each of the drum tracks here into this Bricasti. So this is a bus I have set up, and then I just have the open air plugin loaded in on the bus, and I send from each of the drum tracks into this bus here, and I'm sending at the default level, which is -6 on each of the sends here. Sending into the bus here, we have the open air plugin first in the chain. Then second in the chain, I have an EQ wiping off all of the low end, the super lows here, and then a little bit of the top end, just so things don't get too crazy with the hi-hat, or if you have a ride cymbal, if they start riding on the bell, things can get a little crazy up on the top end. And it rolls off some of the harshness from the cymbals as well. We don't want that coming in on the room mic. We want it to feel natural, like it's actually sitting in a room. If you're actually back in a room listening to a drum kit, you're not going to get those super highs from the cymbals. They're going to kind of roll off and dissipate as they make their way to the room mics. Leaving all the mid-range in here, but let me A-B these two moves on the EQ for you, and you can hear the difference, especially that the low-end one makes. This really cleans up our kick drum in the room. Now, why do we have that much low end? Because that's not realistic, right? If you're sitting in a room just listening to a drummer play a kit, you're not getting all of that low end. The reason we have it all in this reverb is because we're sending a finished mix of a kick drum into this reverb. So we've boosted all the low end here on the back end of our kick drum to make sure it's nice and fat inside the mix, but when we send that into a reverb, it doesn't translate to being very natural sounding. So what we have to do is roll off all that low end and get our kit sounding balanced in the low end and the low mids to help it sound more natural. And I usually find right around 200 hertz balances the kick drum and the low end of the snare drum very well. So listen one more time with and without that high pass. Pay attention to how when we kick the high pass in, our kick drum balances out with our snare drum. And if you have an EQ that'll give you the analyzer here and you can see where your frequencies are bouncing around, you could do it visually too. You could roll up your high pass filter so you see our kick and our snare hitting at about the same level here in the low end. And that'll give you a balanced picture of the low end on your kit. And it'll also help your kick and snare sit very evenly as you pull this up underneath your kit. If you're getting more of your snare in your room mic as you pull up the room mic, obviously it's going to make your snare feel louder in your drum mix, which you don't necessarily want unless you want more room on your snare than you do on the rest of the kit. I want a good picture of the kit here in the room. That's why I'm making sure the kick drum and the snare drum are balanced here in the room mic. I'll A-B this top one for you. This isn't making the greatest difference on the kit, but again, just a nice safe move up on the top to make sure things don't get too crazy or too harsh. You can hear it controls our hi-hat a little bit on the top end. Make sure our cymbals don't jump out too much. Again, I don't want so much of that coming in from the room mic. We're getting most of our cymbal noise coming from the overheads. If you're standing in a room, you're back from a kit, or if it's an actual picture from the microphones that you have up in the room microphones aren't going to catch all of that really high detail top end. That's going to be dissipated by the time it hits your room microphone. So this move up top just makes it feel more natural and more like an actual room mic on the kit. The last thing I have here is the binaural pan plugin, and all this is doing is narrowing the room sound a little bit. When I initially pull this plugin in and I load up the IR, it's very wide sounding, and to me that sounds unnatural. If you want a huge wide sound, maybe you have big rock guitars and you can deal with that really wide sound, that's great. It'll pull up, make your drums sound really huge and really wide. Here in this mix, it's a couple acoustic guitars is mainly making up our rhythm section there. So we got drums, bass, acoustic guitars, and vocals. We don't need a huge wide drum sound, so I'm narrowing it to about 54% width here, and that helps it feel more realistic and fit it to the track here. Let's take a listen with and without this plugin. So I'll start with it and I'll bypass it. You can hear how crazy wide the drum sound gets in the room mic here. Without narrowing the room mics, it feels too wide, it feels unrealistic for a room mic situation, and it feels slightly phasey to me. The other reason I'm doing this is I don't want that low end that we're getting from the room mic on the kick drum to be that wide. I like to have my low end more tucked towards the middle. The fundamental of the snare isn't too big of an issue as it's spread out wide. It gives the snare some width and some depth to it when it hits, which is fine. It emphasizes the impact a little bit more. But just narrowing it to about 54% makes it feel more realistic to me. If you're setting this up, just throw one of these on, even if you don't think you need it. Throw one of these on and pull your width down and see if it starts to feel more natural and more realistic to you. If it does, you're going to need this binaural pan or any kind of width plugin in. If it starts to feel small and maybe too dry or too short, then you don't need that width plugin. But always give it a shot and just make sure you can get your drums as natural as possible sounding with this room mic. So now we have our 3 plugins in on our room emulation here. All we do from there is simply pull it up underneath our drum mix here. So it was up at 2.5. I'm going to pull it all the way down here and ease it in. So we'll have our dry drums to start, and then I'm slowly going to ease this room emulation in till we have a nice, full, big picture of our kit here. Right there feels really good to me. It gives me the length on the snare that I would get if I had a pair of room mics up, and it gives me some of that mid-range depth on the kick drum that I would have if I had some room mics up and I was hearing the kick drum in the room, right? It gives it a little bit more length, but it feels more like depth to me, right? When the kick drum hits, we have some more mid-range impact that kind of echoes through the room. That helps the kick drum feel more real and also a little bit bigger because of the mid-range presence we have on top of our normal kick drum mix there. Let me A-B this one more time for you here. Just in and out. We'll start without it with the dry drums, and then I'll kick this room emulation in. You can hear how big and full our drum mix becomes because of this. One thing to consider when you do put this in on kick drum, the faster your kick drum, the less of the kick drum you want in your room mic usually. If your kick drum's going really, really fast and you have what I have here, the length of the kick drum in the room mic, it's going to get a little messy sounding because you're going to have a bunch of kicks kind of stacked on top of each other building up in your room sound. You don't necessarily want that. So keep that in mind. The faster your kick sound, generally the less you want in the room emulation here or in the reverb. Here, I like the length I'm getting on the kick drum, so it doesn't bother me that much. One more final time here, without and then with our room emulation here. It's that simple. All we're doing here, because we don't have a room mic on these drums, we're sending all of our drums into a bus here, and then on the bus, we're loading up an impulse response of a reverb here, so an actual room from the Bricasti unit here, and then using that as our reverb. Doing a touch of EQ and a touch of width here at the end to make it sound as natural and as real as possible so we can pull it up and give our drums that extra depth and that extra sense of realism in the mix. I hope that was helpful for you. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you're ready to take your drum mixes to the next level, then I have just the tool for you, and it is completely free. It is my 3-step framework for mixing drums workshop, and you can get access to that by clicking the link in the video description, and it will help you dial in a repeatable workflow for mixing professional sounding drum mixes. Thank you so much for watching today, and I will see you in the next video.